Морин МакГарвин у нас следующая, она по-английски будет говорить. Все ли говорят по-английски?
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Maureen, all the way from London. To introduce Maureen McGarvey, I should tell you that to me, Maureen has always been an image of a manager and a leader from an ELT community. Maureen spent quite a lot of time working and managing schools in Hungary, then in Spain, and then in London, working for a huge school which you may know, IH London, for some years. Maureen is also very active at ITEFL, International Association of Teachers of English.
Yeah, as a foreign language.
As a foreign language, I started getting confused about L. And at the moment, Maureen is working as a business consultant for school owners. Maureen is a teacher of our course Школа управления языковыми проектами. That's the Russian name, Maureen, and where she teaches some subjects, including school culture. And Maureen is an invited academic director for the Dmitry Nikitin School, and generally a very nice person. So I'd like to give the floor to Maureen. Maureen, would you impress us with your beautiful presentation?
Well, I'm not sure I'll impress you, but I'll certainly do my best. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us, and thank you to the Dmitry Nikitin School for inviting me to speak at this conference. I'm very excited. I just wish I could be in Yaroslavl in person with you, but maybe another year that will happen. Okay, and the session is called "Why Should I Care What You Think?" Okay, and I wanted to work with you on this topic because I wanted us to start thinking about consultation and management consultation with staff, and what is it? Let's think about staff consultation, okay? Do you consult staff on what sort of issues? So if you're going to change your class sizes, for example, would you consult your staff, yes or no? If you were going to change your class times, would you consult your staff? If you were going to change the schedules for when the classrooms and the toilets, etc., were clean, would you consult your staff? If you were going to change your textbook, would you consult your staff? If you were discussing possible new courses you could offer, would you consult your staff? Would you consult your staff about changes to pay? So from what you said in response to these questions, basically you're saying you would consult your staff about absolutely everything. When I talk about consultation, I'm thinking of an idea. It could be any of the ones that are on the screen at the moment or another one. Let's take the idea of possible new courses, for example. And this is something that we're thinking about doing, and we've worked out how we're going to do it. And then we take it to a staff meeting, let's say, to present this idea to staff. So it's more of a formalized presentation than your very, very positive thing about answering questions, which I completely agree with. In the context of the type of consultation I'm thinking about, which I just described to you, I'd like you to consider different perspectives here. And I'd like to first of all consider what I think are managers' perceptions of consultation, of the consultation process, okay? I think this is how managers view it very often. Management discuss the issue in the management team, whatever constitutes the management team in your organization. Then management present the issue to staff. They might call a formal staff meeting and say, right, we'd like to talk about, staff may have some questions, as you said, Alonia, and management answer staff's questions. After that, management discuss further in the management team and proceed, go forward. So management discuss, present to staff, management proceed. Yeah. And I think that's how managers view consultation. I think staff perceptions are often quite different of our consultation. I think for staff, they see it as management present the issue to staff. We're thinking about changing class times, so we'll now work all day Saturday and Sunday morning. Staff ask management questions. Okay, so far pretty much the same. Management sometimes answer our questions. Management often get defensive or aggressive because quite often they don't like the questions that staff are asking. Management do what they were going to do in the first place, and it's a waste of time and completely pointless. And this, I think, is a very common perception, staff perception of consultation. And I've seen it, and I'm sure you have seen it, or you've been in this situation time and time and time again, where you're called into a meeting, management present to you, you ask a question, they go, well, of course, well, no, why, yes. They get very defensive, can get quite aggressive, and you leave the meeting and you feel as a staff member, well, that was a waste of time because they're going to do what they're going to do anyway. Yeah? And what's quite interesting is to think, why are these two perceptions so different? Why are they so different? Now, obviously, this staff perception that I've put here, that we're sort of nodding because we've been those staff in those kind of meetings, this doesn't come from nowhere. This is part of, if you like, it represents your organizational culture and your management staff relationships. And if this is how staff respond to consultation, I would suggest this is because consultation has not been handled well in the past, and there is very little trust between management and staff. So Alonia was saying earlier that if staff ask her any question, she tries to answer them because she feels that the people who work in a school have the right to know what's happening in the place where they work. I think that's what you were saying, Alonia. But very often, staff in a school, particularly in a consultation, can think or can feel that their questions will only be answered if they are the questions management want to answer. So if they are the right questions, yeah? If they are the right questions for management, not if they are the right question for staff. So if you're talking about, for example, changing the time of classes, yeah, the right question for management could be something like, do we have to teach both Saturday and Sunday? But the right question for staff might be, can we refuse this? Because I have elderly parents and 2 small children, and Saturday and Sunday is the only time I have for them. Yeah? But that's if staff say, can we refuse this? Management will immediately say, no, nobody can refuse it. So already you're in a conflict, okay? And I think it's quite interesting to look at some emotional responses. And I've taken these from actual consultations I've been part of. And I'd like you to think about who says what. So the first reaction is, I don't know why I bother. I don't know why we bother. I'm fed up of being shouted at. I'm fed up of being treated like an idiot. I have heard this from both, but I've often heard it from staff because, as you remember from a previous slide, we talk about management getting defensive or aggressive. And a very common management strategy, if you're being asked questions that make you uncomfortable or that you don't like, is to become very patronizing to that staff member and say things like, well, of course, there are a lot of financial and business implications here which you probably don't understand. And that can make staff feel very resistant. They just don't get it, do they? The number of times I've heard they just don't get it makes me think that nobody in the world gets anything at all, ever. But what's interesting for us as people are interested in business and management is, why do these two sides feel the other side has no idea? Why is that the situation? what's happened to your organizational communication that your staff and management can say with complete conviction, they just don't get it? Well, why don't they get it? What are they not getting? And why are they not getting it? Why, as Dmitry says, are you now in two silos? Completely separate, and there's no bridge between. You know, that's a real, if you find yourself saying that, or you hear your staff saying that, you've got to do some serious thinking about your internal communications. I don't know if you remember those old black and white American cowboy and Indian films. Maybe you do remember them, maybe you don't. But at one point, if there was going to be an attack, they would always say, get the wagons in a circle, you know, so we can defend ourselves. You don't necessarily need to defend yourself, but you do need to make sure that you're working together. And you're not in a situation where people say they just don't get it, or the same people always have the same agenda. That's quite often a management comment about particular staff members. And again, for me, it begs the question of why is this person always banging on about this same thing? Well, the reason they're banging on about the same thing could be because nobody's talked to them about that thing, or nobody's understood the importance of that thing. So you know, that people have the same agenda when their agenda item is not addressed. And finally, well, I think that was a good meeting. I've come out of meetings and heard management say, wow, I think that was a good meeting. And my reaction would be, are you on drugs? Are you taking some kind of pharmaceutical that makes you think this disaster was actually a good meeting? And that again can show you how management are really remote from staff. And I want to think about what you want when you consult staff. And I'm not going to ask you to respond to these questions, but I would like you to reflect on these questions as part of consultation. Do you want them to understand? Now, if you want staff to understand, sometimes you have to give more information, more background to enable them to understand. And this is a very delicate balance, because you want enough information to understand, but not too much information that they're drowning in detail. And if you're moving from a quite closed management style to a more open consultative style, that's going to take a bit of time and a bit of information transfer. Do you want them to ask you questions? Now, we know we're supposed to say yes to this, but sometimes you just don't want people to ask you questions. Sometimes you just want to present something and then say, I'm going to leave this with you, and then I'm going to come back next week to deal with any questions that you've got. But sometimes the consultation process, this initial stage, can be purely transmissive. So if you don't want people to ask you questions, don't say, do you have any questions? Because it's going to be obvious you don't want to answer them. Do you want to answer their questions? Maybe not. So if they ask questions you don't want to answer, what are you going to say? You're going to say, I don't want to answer that now, or that question's not relevant now, or I'm not prepared to answer that question. Why aren't you prepared? Yeah? If you want them to ask you questions, you have to know that you want to answer their questions, however difficult and or emotional or embarrassing or uncomfortable it can be. Do you want them to care? Do you want them to care about this issue, or are you just simply telling them? If you want an emotional involvement, you're going to get some degree of emotional reaction, and that's quite important to remember. If you want your staff to care, you have to demonstrate to your class that you care, to your staff that you care for them as well. Do you want them to agree with you? Well, if so, you're a great optimist, I would say, if you're consulting and you want your staff to always agree with you. Because I think there's a common confusion stemming from that last question are confused, and it's a, let's call it a lexical confusion, and it's with two items, one being this one and one being this one. So what's the difference? I think reaching consensus for me ultimately means that everybody agrees that this is the best way to proceed. So it's a very democratic way of working. As you say, Dmitry, you know, it takes a long time at first, but it does become an accepted way of working. And if you can reach consensus where everybody agrees, you're in a very fortunate position. With consultation, management have their job, staff have their input, and management have their job. And you're not seeking agreement necessarily. What you're seeking is an exchange of ideas and a recognition of validity of the other party's ideas. And I'm going to give you now, in my final 6 minutes, the 3-step rule which will make, which I think makes consultation work. Okay. So, step 1. Present to staff, listen to their questions, and answer if you can. Okay. Remember, on an earlier slide, we said that staff perception is that management don't answer their questions, or they get defensive, or they get aggressive, or they don't like being questioned at all. Step 2, discuss staff's questions and reactions in your management team. Arrive at a decision about what you're going to do. So if your issue that you're consulting on is, as we said, we're going to change class times, we're going to work Saturday and all day Sunday, you present that to staff, you listen to their questions, you answer if you can, you go back to your management team, say, well, what do you think? People weren't very happy about having to work both weekend days, were they? No. So what can we do about that? And you have that conversation, and you decide how you're going to proceed. Okay. And then we have step 3. And step 3 is the step that I think everyone forgets. And that's why people do not truly consult. And I think step 3 is so important, it gets a slide all to itself. And here is step 3. And when you look at step 3, and I talk you through it, think genuinely, as a manager, is this what I do? You go back to staff. You answer any questions you couldn't answer last time. Fascinating for me how, when we're training teachers, we always say, and if students ask you a question and you can't answer it, just say, I'll find out and I'll tell you next time. But as managers, staff ask us a question, we can't answer it, we go away, we stick our fingers in our ears and we go, la, 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 can't hear you, I can't hear you, and you never answer their questions. Is it any wonder then that staff think questioning management is completely pointless? So return to staff, answer any questions you couldn't answer last time. Tell staff how you have amended your proposal in the light of the consultation. This is the bit that I think most managers never do. If you present something to staff, they ask you loads of questions, you go away and then you just carry on. No wonder staff feel consultation is pointless and a waste of time. But if you present, you go away, you come back and say, okay, now you had these questions which I couldn't answer. Answer 1, answer 2, answer 3. We were talking about classes Saturday and Sunday. Now, a lot of you were really unhappy about that. So after hearing your thoughts, we've decided that we can ask you to work 2 Saturdays a month and 1 Sunday half day. And we can manage the rota to get around that. Let them know what you're changing because of their input and why. We're changing it because we realised actually for a lot of people, working both weekend days would be a little bit too much, and having 2 consecutive days off in the week also wasn't convenient for some of you, because you want to have at least 1 weekend day to spend with your family. So we hadn't fully considered that, so we've factored that in now, and we've changed the schedule, and the new schedule, thanks to your input, looks like this. Let them know what you're not changing despite their suggestions and why. Because if you only tell them about the things that are changed, then you're not really consulting, are you? You're still striving for consensus, really. But I think it's quite important to say to people, however, we're not changing the class times. I know a lot of you wanted a later start, but our market research shows us that this is the peak time for classes. And because this is a new venture, we're going to go with what the market tells us they want to have for those class times. As we, roll this out, we might change the class times, but for the moment, although I know it's not your preferred option, the classes are going to start at this time. Take questions, but don't defend. And then proceed with what you were going to do, monitor it, evaluate it, and feed back to staff. I mean, this is what you would do anyway with any innovation or any change that you went through. But the feeding back to staff on the consultation, the saying, yes, we've changed this because of your suggestions, we haven't changed this, and here's why, I think is the magical third step that a lot of people don't do. And I think that's consultation. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Bye.